Hello everyone and welcome to a really awesome game. It's from the last game from the day 2 of the Croatian Grand Chess Tour Rapid. It's Nepomniachtchi versus Ivan Šarić, the highest rated player in Croatia, and two of them have something very interesting in common. They both have a positive score against Magnus in classical chess after facing Magnus more than once. Well, we've checked out the Nepo's games against Magnus, but Ivan here he defeated Magnus with the white pieces in the Tromsø Olympiad in 2014, and he drew against Magnus in the Tata Steel with the black pieces in 2015. So this game, it's really an awesome one, and it's really a top tier game. So sure, you're going to enjoy it. Let's check it out. So Nepo is still leading the tournament, and now if he beats Ivan, he can really prolong his lead. So Nepo with the white pieces opens with e4. Sorry about that. We have c5 by Ivan going for the Sicilian defense, knight to f3, e6, and now d4. So striking in the center, c captures, and now knight to f6. We have knight to c3, and now knight to c6. We have knight b to d5, knight d to b5 now, with some ideas of maybe knight to d6 check, but of course we have just d6. Bishop to f4 by Nepo, now going after this pawn. It's attacked 3 times, and here Ivan just plays e5, chases away the bishop. If this, we have bishop back to g5. Interestingly, it's a similar position to if you know the game Anderson versus Morphy, except the knight was still back here, and Anderson launched forward with f5. But here we have no such crazy moves. We have bishop to g5 now, and now comes a6, chasing away this knight. We have knight to a3. Even though you could capture here, you can capture because if the queen captures, then knight to c7 check. But black is very happy capturing with the g pawn, as it's well, similar in many such lines of the Sicilian defense. Later you can use the semi-open g file for attacks. You can play e5, attack white center. So it's really good for black. So instead, after this a6 move, we have knight to a3, and now Ivan goes b5 now, threatening b4 to win one of the knights. So knight to d5, and now bishop to e7, and only now bishop captures an f6. Here Nepo eliminates the knight. He gives up the bishop pair, but he will be left with this very strong knight on d5 that Ivan will have to take care of later on. So bishop captures here, and now knight, and now pawn to c3. Nepo will now use the c2 square to get the knight back into the game. So here we have bishop to g5. You want to attack this knight with knight to e7, but if you do it right away, then we will capture an f6 and mess up black's pawn structure, and here it will be good for white. So instead, bishop to g5. Now we have this plan, and this knight will not be able to capture an f6, and also this bishop will be very strong on this diagonal, as you'll see later on. So knight to c2. Nepo prepares to bring the knight into the game. Knight to e7, and now we have knight to b4. Now saying, okay, if you capture here, I can even capture with my queen, and it's a pretty interesting idea. If captures, the rook is under attack, and what do? You can't really defend it, so you have to move the rook, and if rook b8, now you don't play knight to c6, because then bishop to b7 would pin the knight. You actually capture on a6, and this is very good for white. Captures here, queen c6 check. We're gonna pick up the bishop, and the white is, well, just better. At some point you can easily create a passed pawn here, start pushing it, and hope to win the game. So after this knight c to b4 move, we have castles by Šarić, and now g3. Nepo now ready to develop his light square bishop, and now there is one game in the database where a5 was played, and it makes sense. You want to dislodge this knight and then capture here. The problem is after a5, white can simply capture on e7, and after queen captures knight e5, this knight takes its place, and black hasn't really achieved all that much. Even though this is one of the engine's favorite ideas, but we have bishop to e6 by Ivan, and it is only now as of move 15 that we have a completely new game. So let's see how Nepo deals with this move. Well, Nepo starts the attack right away, h4. Chasing away this bishop, we have bishop to h6 now, still keeping control of this entire diagonal, and bishop to g2. We have a5 now, attacking this knight, and now knight captures on e7. We have queen captures on e7, and now knight comes to d5. And here The knight again finds its place on d5, and well, black's light square bishop for the moment is fine where it is. You do not want to capture. If you capture, then well, black is just left with a weak backwards d6 pawn. Later on, you can easily attack it, pile up on it. You can even castle, bring the other rook into the attack. So it's this should be a problem for black. So instead, after knight to d5, we have queen to b7 by even, and now comes g4. Nepo says, all right, I'm just gonna play g5 and trap your bishop. So Ivan has to do something. Now he could play f6 and try to stop this attack, but Ivan knows the old saying that you know, never play f6, although you can play it in some positions, but even in those positions where you can play it, it's very hard to play it. So here he just captures on d5 and he goes straight into the endgame. If e captures, it shouldn't be a problem. We can keep this bishop on f4, and it should be a good position for black. So instead, after bishop captures, we have queen captures, and here even just trades queens, captures, and now bishop to f4. And now we have this endgame, same amount of everything except the bishops are of opposite colors. And whenever you have a case of bishops of opposite colors, you want to start attacking your opponent, because then if he has to defend, then you will have 3 pieces for attacking, 2 rooks and the bishop, and he will have only 2 rooks for defense, as your opponent's dark square bishop will not be able to oppose your own light square bishop. So here, king e2, as usual in the endgame, you have to bring your king forward. We have rook 8 to b8, and now a3, preventing b4 from being played. We have g6 now, and of course h5. You gave him a target, so now Nepo of course wants to attack it. We have king to g7 and rook to h3 now, adding a rook to the defense of the 3rd rank, but also maybe some with some ideas of doubling up on the h file. So rook f to c8, now preparing to bring the rook maybe to c4, and now king to d3. We have king to f6, and now h captures on g6. We have h captures and the rook to h7. So Nepo gains a lot of activity for his rook, but now rook to c7, we defend here, and now bishop to e4. So what do you play here? Well, Ivan goes king to g5. He says, all right, there's an active king, but there's also a 2 active king, and well, let's see which one is this. And Nepo says, okay, you can have this pawn. I'm just going to play king to e2. And now the problem is, if Ivan grabs this pawn, he's getting checkmated, because if king captures, you just bring the rook to g1 with check, and the king has no squares. The bishop and the rook cover all of these squares, so you have to block with the bishop, and then just captures king f4, and now of course rook to h4 will be checkmate. So Ivan not about to fall for that. He strikes with b4. And now, okay, he's ready to bring the rook, not to c2, of course, the bishop covers that, but he will gain control of the c file. So here, c captures on b4, we have a captures on b4, and now a4, he gives Nepo the passed a pawn, but now b3, he frees up the b4 square for the rook, and, well, black will have a lot of activity here. So king to f3, and now comes rook to b4, putting pressure along the entire 4th rank, and also just attacking this pawn. So you might even win it with something like rook a7, rook captures here, if white does not continue pushing this pawn forward, which Nepo does. Nepo plays a5. He says, all right, I'm just gonna promote this pawn to a queen, and it's a win for me. However, this position is completely lost for Nepo, so feel free to pause the video here and try to find this brilliant idea for Ivan while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting this incredible exchange sacrifice. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's rook captures on e4, and this is just crushing. And an extra round of applause for those of you who found this move, but also figured out that the rook cannot be captured. Then you truly are a master of this game. Because if the rook is captured, well, then we just play f5 check, and then we win white's rook stranded on h7, for example, captures. We can even keep harassing the white king with e4, let's say check king e2, and then we pick up this, and there's no way to promote this. If a6, we're just going to block it with rook to a7, and I mean, black is up a piece, so of course completely winning for black. So after rook captures on a4, Nepo just continues pushing a6. He knows that Ivan will have to give up his rook to stop the passed pawn. So here, rook to d4, getting the rook out of harm's way. Now a7, and now we have e4 with check. Now Ivan starts attacking the white king, king to g2, and now you have to give up the rook for the passed pawn, otherwise you're just lost. So rook captures, we have rook captures, not right away. First we had e4 check, of course, sorry about that. e4 check, king to g2, and now rook captures on a7. We have rook captures on a7, and now rook to d2. And now we have this position where it's, 5 pawns against 4, and even has a bishop and the rook against 2 rooks. But, you can't really allow e3 to pick up this pawn, so you have to defend this, and then you're going to lose this pawn. So even will be up at least 3 pawns. So here, king f1, you cannot allow e3, and now rook captures on b2. And now we have this awesome pass pawn on b3. Rook to b7, now Nepo has to play rook to h8, rook to b8, and try and win this pawn, but Ivan is ready for that. He plays king captures on g4, we have rook to h8, and now bishop to e5. The bishop will now guard the b2 square, the rook will move with tempo as the king is here, so we can deliver check, and then we're going to play pawn to b2, where the bishop will be nicely guarding this pass pawn. So rook h to b8, and now rook to b1 with check, king to g2, and now b2. So now it doesn't matter that Nepo has 2 rooks, because the bishop on e5 is protected and it guards the pass pawn. So at some point Nepo will have to give up the rook for this pawn and bishop. So rook captures on f7, he can grab a pawn on the other side of the board, but now rook to d1, threatening to promote this pawn to a queen. So now Nepo has to go back to keep an eye on the b1 square, and now rook captures on d5. Again, even up 3 pawns. We have rook to b4, attacking this pawn, but just king f5. And now you just have to put your pieces on optimal squares. For example, put the king somewhere here, and then start advancing this pawn, and that should be game. So can Nepo prevent this? We have rook to f8 check, king to e6, rook to e8 check, king d7, and now rook has to go back. And like we said in yesterday's video, there's a certain feeling you get when a player starts checking like mad. So rook to d1 now, and rook 4 to b7. Again, keeping the black king in check, king to e6, now rook captures on b2. There's no other move you can play, because now, well, the king is in perfect position. Now the pawn will just start marching forward, and that's it. So here Nepo has to give up the rook for bishop and pawn, and now he will try to hold this being down 2 pawns. So d5, and now rook to b8 by Nepo. We have d4, but now rook to g8, going after this pawn, so Ivan defends it. But now rook to f8, going after Ivan's king. King to g5, now rook to e8, going after this pawn. So Ivan again defends it, now rook to f8 check. We have king e5 and rook back to e8 check. So maybe you can somehow hold this by attacking this pawn. However, now king d5, rook to g8, now Ivan gives up the pawn, but he just plays d3. So rook captures on g6, just d2, and there's no stopping this, because there's no check. The king covers this square, and even if there was, it wouldn't really do him any good. So here we have rook to g8, and now Ivan just continues in a calm way with king to c4. But you could also end it instantly with rook to g1. That's also possible. Just king captures and d1 queen check. But Ivan prefers to do it the other way around. King c4. We have rook to d8, and now king to c3. And now Nepo saw that Ivan was just, keeping it cool, not rushing into anything, and of course it was in this position on move 63 that Jan Nepomniachtchi resigned the game. It's always sad when people resign on move 63, as the chessboard has 64 squares. So I always, if you're on move 63, play one more move, just for those people who have a problem with such things. But yeah, here after king to c3, he resigned, and a brilliant victory for Ivan, who now is in the top of the tournament, sharing second place with let me just quickly check. I don't have the standings here, so I'm gonna have to check it the good old-fashioned way for you. So Nepo still leading with the tournament, even with this loss, with 8 out of 12, and then with 7 out of 12 we have 3 people: Vishwanathan Anand, Maxim Vachier-Lagrave, and Ivan Šarić here. Then with 6 points we have Anish Giri and Yang Krzysztof Duda. With 5 points Mamedyarov, Grishuk, and Korobov. With 4 points we have Jordan Van Forest, and that's it for the standing. So yeah, really awesome game. Really hoping to show at least one more one more game from yesterday, as there were a lot of really cool games. So feel free to use hashtag suggestion, and of course I will go through them. So very, very impressive game by both of them, and Ivan was again able to take down another very strong player, this time the World Chess Championship candidate. So congratulations on that. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I would like to thank Cody Tudipu, Kevin Keith, Robert Aratun, and Jim, and Al Boyd for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of this very nice tournament, checking up on your wonderful suggestions, and whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.